I'm really excited to get here and to kind of go through the presentation. So I'm just going to move over to what I like to call options, solutions, and opportunities for Canadian publishers, and there are a lot of opportunities for exports. We're going to talk a little bit about why print on demand is important, the revenue opportunities that come up, including new revenue sources, enhanced existing sources, exports and international sales that can come out of this, the cost savings, which is very, very important, not just for warehousing, shipping, but returns. I love looking at negotiating win-win-win situations where everybody in the supply chain gets to be involved. And I think location works really, really well with digital. We're going to look at starting small, finishing big. Rob is going to go specifically into some details on Lightning Source, which I'm pretty excited about. We're not going to talk about books and publishing being dead and why we should all just go home. We're not going to discuss what the next Harry Potter or Twilight or Hunger Games might be, why the B and R in Lefebvre are silent. We will not discuss Einstein's theory of relativity, which means I'm going to be very comfortable in this conversation. We are going to look at the world's fastest special order, using print on demand to convert academic sales, going from 50% to 110% of enrollment. Exciting new experiments in publishing, book selling, and international distribution. We will, of course, look at my famous toilet bowl slide. We're going to look at what I believe is very, very important for the supply chain, and that is store and publisher collaboration. And we're going to look at the possibility of publisher-publisher collaboration as a way to move that forward, surpassing the yearly target in a single month, and the importance of not turning away people who want to purchase your books. But first of all, why am I here, and where is this perspective coming from? And why is he talking to us about print on demand? I'm a book nerd. I like to describe myself that way. I have been interested in books for my whole life as a writer, as a bookseller, and it's sort of a publisher, but I'm not really a publisher. And that's where I think that some of the things that I can do, you guys can do even better. So I've been a writer since I was a young child. I have always been a reader. I just retired from CBA president role. I have always been an oral storyteller and editor of my own works, anthologies and magazines. Researcher, of course, is always important. Publisher of my own personal imprint. I have been a printer running an espresso book machine, which we're going to talk about. And I am a POD advocate and a digital book advisor. So again, like I said, book nerd. I started writing on one of these wonderful devices when I was 13 years old. I spent the summer working on the Underwood typewriter. There's the loving Baba who made sure I was fed and nourished while I was working on it. And this is a terrible Conan the Barbarian fantasy novel inspired by the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies that I was working on. And of course, early form of research was the Dungeons and Dragons handbook that I was using as a reference as I was working on this. Back in the day, I used to submit manuscripts and wait patiently to hear back from a publisher. Of course, when I heard back from the publisher, it wasn't always a good experience. Good news is that in the digital age, I can send manuscripts off to publishers, but there's an easy way for them to reject my submissions. I eventually did get a dozen or so stories published in small press magazines. They were a temporary shelf life, and I got queries like this a lot of times, which is frustrating. So you're a writer? Yeah, I'm a writer. Well, where can I find and read your work? The problem was it would be available for 3 to 6 months, maybe on a shelf in some store somewhere. So I could say, well, if you go to Minneapolis, you'll probably find my book on this one bookstore where I know it's available, and then it would be gone. So the solution came to me via print on demand, and this was quite a few years ago. This was back in 2004. In 2004, I lost both my print on demand and my self-publishing virginity, and I did it with Lightning Source. 2004, I used Lightning Source from Ingram. It cost me approximately $300 to get a book ready, which was basically a collection of previously published short stories. I keep the book alive for $12 US per year, so it's known as actively in print on demand. I set the retail price of $12.95, and the print cost per unit is $3.90, which is more expensive than offset printing, but I don't need to print in vast quantities, which is important for me because I didn't have the extra money. I can provide a 40% discount to bookstores, and so I'm making approximately $387 revenue per unit. So it was an effective way for me to make money and make my work available. Not make a lot of money, but still make money. So I use Lightning Source for global distribution. So there's various things you can do with it. You can do front or backlist models to all major markets. You use it to reduce your warehousing and storing costs, particularly as titles move into backlist from front list. It's market-driven models that they have, which are the print the order, or publisher-driven models where Lightning Source becomes an invisible partner in your order fulfillment, and they have branded shipping. Rob is going to talk a little bit more about that in detail. One of the things I've taken advantage of quite a few times is the various bindings and styles, hardcover, trade paperback, different color options available. So some of the things I learned was, I learned how to hide the fact that I had self-published this. It was available from Ingram, so I created an imprint that a designer friend of mine designed called Stark Publishing. At the end of the day, I also learned that a book is a book, and readers don't really care about where it came from so long as it is good. They care about the content. I had moved on. This is just some examples of me in Toronto, in Ottawa, in Sudbury, and in Pittsburgh of chain bookstores that would actually able to carry one-hand screening where I was able to do book signings. So even as an independent author, I was able to move around and effectively get the book into various supply chain channels, which was really important. So one of the things that this moved on to for me, which I think is really, really important, is a demonstration that I have some print-on-demand titles that I make available as a self-published independent author, but I also have a wonderful publisher who does offset printing. Dundurn in Toronto has Haunted Hamilton and Spooky Sudbury, and this is an example of the two of them working together where I may be doing a book signing and both types of books are available. So it's not an exclusivity thing. It's not all books coming from offset printing and all books coming from digital, but it's a mixture of them because Dundurn got my books into Costco, and as you know, with large volumes, it makes more sense to print in large quantities. But then with my other stuff, which is coming from Lightning Source, the bookstores are not going to order in skids. They're going to order in maybe carton quantities or even singles or offs like that. I'm going to take you back to the McMaster print-on-demand experience just to illustrate how I was able to apply this at a very concrete bookseller level. So in the beginning, why would McMaster University Bookstore be interested in print-on-demand? So let's take us back to 1931 through the mid-1990s. It was a monopoly for campus bookstores. Life was good. You couldn't not make money in the things that you did. You basically, professor said this book was available. You ordered the book from the publisher. The student came in. Every single student bought one. Life was good. Bookselling was wonderful. Oh, God, I wish I'd been a bookseller back then. Later on, McMaster Campus Bookstore became known as Titles in recognition that they were one of the largest general entrance bookstores in the GTA prior to Chapters and Indigo opening up. They were one of the largest, except for the world's biggest bookstore in Toronto with 40,000 titles. Very beautiful place to walk into. And then in 1997, the first big box store opened up just not too far away in Burlington was the very first Chapters. And then, of course, the Ancaster Chapters. So suddenly Titles had two major competitors. Indigo opened up in Burlington as well, and suddenly there were three big box stores that had way more titles than Titles had. And then Amazon happened, and Amazon became really, really, really popular because people could shop from the comfort of their own homes. They didn't even have to leave to buy a book. So this is what happened to general book sales between 1998 and 2008 at the bookstore at McMaster. This is exactly where our sales were for general books. It was not looking good. So the other thing that was happening to the industry is you were seeing a lot of bookstores going out of business, and that was the fear that many booksellers still face. So what is a bookseller to do? Besides the bitter, ironic humor of telling people to try Amazon for the restrooms when they were in the midst of closing their stores, and that must have taken a really strong person to pause for that humor in the midst of knowing they were going to be out of a job very, very soon. So what was the future going to look like? So 2009 through 2013 and beyond, what were we going to do to maintain our relevance? Was it going to be a terrifying, devastating blow for the McMaster bookstore? So in 2008, began to do some research. Visited the University of Alberta's bookstore, the Espresso Book Machine, and they were the first in Canada. They were the third in the world, so they were pretty cutting edge. And they went to visit, and I saw the bookstore in action and what they were doing and the exciting things they were doing. If you take a look, you'll see that is the cover for my book, One Hand Screaming. One of the tests I did was I took the very same file I had loaded to Lightning Source, and I brought it, and that's Paul, who's the textbook buyer there, and we went off and printed a beautiful copy of One Hand Screening. And one of the great things about the Espresso book machine is that through Lightning Source, through Ingram's Lightning Source, you can make books available right into bookstores using this technology. And so we did both tests, which was perfect. I came up with the concept. I didn't come up with the concept of a reimagined supply chain, but I came up with the concept of how we were going to apply that in the McMaster University bookstore. The concept of distributing digitally, printing locally was very much at the center of that. Came up with a 2-year business plan, and the 2-year business plan was we were purchasing the Espresso book machine for a significant amount of money, $174,000, and I had to convince the powers that be that this was a good investment. Came up with a 2-year business plan on how it was going to pay for itself. The business plan included not just a combination of actual sales coming off the machine, but side effect sales for being a pioneer, and that's part of the strategy as well. I call it the gawk factor. People would walk in just to see the machine and end up buying something else. So there were 3 key areas in the business plan. Instant special orders. Sure enough, Amazon may be able to ship that in 24 hours, but we could print it for you in 15 minutes. And that was a key message that we kept telling customers as they were coming into the store. And again, even in the early days when we only had access to 1 million books, there are now between 3 and 5 million books available. But even back then, it was an exciting thing to think about. We wanted to focus, again, on lower cost of textbooks, because as the student bookstore, one of our mandates was to save students money. And that was really, really important. And it was part of the honesty and integrity and the role that we were playing there on campus. And then, of course, we thought we would make some money on self-publishing services for those local people who wanted to come and take advantage of what we had to offer in the bookstore. And it would just be an additional revenue stream. So this is one of the things that happened. We created an imprint, Titles on Demand, and suddenly it took off from there. We were on the news, we were on the radio, we were in the newspaper. The students were coming to flock and check out all the different books. Again, you notice I had to use one of my titles in the middle there. There's the cover of One Hand Screaming. And we started looking at the textbook market because that was key to our role. And one of the first ones that came up was a title called Reading Hebron, which is published by Playwrights Canada Press. And so my textbook buyer came up to me and said, the professor wants to study this play by Jason Sherman. It's out of print. And when he called, the publisher only had 3 in stock. Well, we needed 80 copies for our class. And we have to be realistic. And you guys know this as publishers. There's no way a publisher is going to print 1,000 copies of this book, which is, the way you would normally do it, just so they could ship 80 to McMaster, just so that at the end of the term we could ship 40 of them back. That's not an effective way to run business. So again, it was pretty much a lost deal until the textbook buyer suggested, well, why don't we get permission from the publisher to see if we could just print it in the bookstore here. If they provide the print-ready files, we could print it here. They also gave us a better deal on it since we were bearing the cost of printing. And so instead of giving us the standard 20% discount that academic bookstores normally got, they gave us a 50% discount on it because we were bearing the cost of printing. There were going to be no returns. It was looking good for both us and the publisher. So we knocked off 30% of the suggested retail price in order to save students even more money, which came up with an incredible win-win-win situation where the faculty member got the textbook that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to use except through the used book market. So that would have been a challenge to get enough copies. The students won because they got a brand new book, which was beautiful, and they were able to pay less for it. The bookstore didn't have to worry about shipping this book back and forth. They always had enough in stock. If we needed just one more, we could print one in 15 minutes. And of course, the bookstore and the publisher made money on that. The author made royalties. I look at that as a successful win-win-win. The second example that came up came from Professor Bill Scarth, who is the chair of the economics department. He had originally written a textbook for a fourth-year class. He wrote it because he couldn't find books out there that he liked enough to want to use, so he wrote his own. And it was being printed by a publisher as a custom textbook for $89.99. And when Bill found out about the machine, he thought, well, I'd like to use this, but one of the challenges he had was the publisher wasn't willing to sell this to anyone other than McMaster. he had faculty member friends in other universities who wanted to purchase it and use it in their class, but for some reason the publisher wasn't willing to ship it. So Bill took the rights to the book, brought it to us, we printed it there, we paid him the same amount of royalties that he was receiving, which was about $8, and we were able to take this and charge only $24.95. Some might suggest that we were selling it for too low of a price, but it was actually a little bit higher because I buffered myself from margin, and here's why I buffered some margin in there. I wanted to be able to pay Bill $8 every time we sold that, whether or not we sold it in our bookstore, where we made the most amount of money, or whether or not we sold it to another bookstore, where we gave them a 50% discount. Again, something that I knew as a bookseller was very, very attractive because we did that without worrying about returns. So we ended up selling it to other bookstores, giving them a 50% discount. With the $8 that Bill was getting, we were still making profit on that book, selling it in our bookstore. We began shipping that not just to Alberta, but we were shipping it to India and Australia. And it was really, really scary because the cost of shipping was often 2 or 3 times as much as the cost of the books. And that's the first example of using POD distribution for an export. There were examples where we tried to get this into the system, and that's where we started to load it to Lightning Source, and we created our own imprint there through Lightning Source, where we were making it available so that people could have it printed closer to home and shipped. So again, we were still making that money without worrying about the distribution aspect of it. We worked really closely as well with McGraw-Primus. They had a program called Primus and is now known as Create, where they did custom textbooks. So rather than use all 18 chapters of a textbook, in this particular case was the psychology textbook. There were probably 5 or 6 chapters that the faculty member knew they were never going to get to, so why charge that for students? So they created custom edition including 12 of the 18 chapters. The concept of a custom text is a bigger discount to store, no returns, and so again, because we were making a larger margin than we would normally make, the 20% margin, we passed the savings on to the student. But we also published that information on the back of our book. The original textbook price was $123.95. Our special custom edition printed in the bookstore was about $62, showing students that it was 50% off the original textbook price. So even though we continued to buy this back as used and had used edition of the original textbooks, students continued to buy it. Our sell-through before we went into this mode was 50% to enrollment. So if we had 100 students in the class, we would only sell 50 units. The sell-through after was 110%. And I couldn't figure out why. The textbook's so cheap that students didn't care if they lost the book and they would just move on and just buy an additional copy. Found out later on when a student came into my store and was asking for the psychology textbook by Myers, social psychology textbook by Myers, and I'd asked them, well, what class are you in? Because one class is using the full textbook and another class is only using these limited chapters, and I don't want you to get the wrong one. And then he sheepishly admitted, well, I actually don't go to McMaster. I'm actually from Western. I drove all the way from London because I heard that I could get the textbook for half price. And I said, but that might not be all the chapters you need. He says, I don't care. I would rather have most of the chapters I need for that price than not have the textbook at all. And that was a really good learning for me to figure out. The other thing that was important here is that there was a positive messaging showing and demonstrating that we were all working together, and that's always been a key factor in this distribute digital and print local. Other textbooks were open source textbooks where it was free or a PDF plus a reasonably priced print-on-demand hard copy. We did this with the title. We printed before Waterloo University Bookstore got their espresso book machine. Book on Think Python. We used public domain books as well. Custom editions, really, really sort of cheap. Think of them as no-frills editions. We also did special book club editions for the Alumni Association to raise money for the library. And that was a really, really amazing thing that we did. And then the thing that really, really took me by surprise was just the utter demand and desire for people to self-publish, whether it was something they did on their own, whether the rights reverted back to them. And there was tons and tons of books that we were able to print from local authors, and we could barely keep up with the demand because 4 times a year we had to focus on titles that were needed for McMaster University. But that's a business that continues to grow, because I'm sure publishers know there may be opportunities there as well. I wanted to look at supply chain improved. June 2009, 10 a.m., the McMaster Daily News, which is a website that everyone at Mac gets when they first boot up their computers when they come in. There was news about a recent Mac grad's new book that was being published called Second Rising, Catherine Weave's beautiful picture of Catherine and her book, and it was a celebration about how she started working on that when she was at McMaster. By 11 a.m., we were having phone calls. People were walking into the bookstore asking, I want to get Second Rising by Catherine. Is it available? By noon, as people were coming on lunch, more walk-in queries about the book. So scrambled to find out who the publisher was, got a hold of them, called them. By 12:45, 15 minutes later, we made an agreement. Contracts were signed. By 3 o'clock, the book was printed in the store because we could easily deliver the digital files. It was the fastest special order I'd ever seen in 20 years of book selling. And it was all because the bookstore and the publisher, who both would have lost the sale had they not been willing to work together, used that distribute digital, print local methodology. Another similar one was an author lecture that was taking place in 3 days. The organizers forgot to tell the bookstore. They're from Colorado. They needed to get the books to Hamilton. The time to cost and ship was ridiculous. The book was also only available on hardcover, and the trade paperback wasn't going to be available until 5 months later. They sent us a file for a special print-on-demand trade paperback edition that was printed that spring as part of the Author in the City tour, and again was a demonstration that even though they were on the other side of the continent, we were able to have that book to satisfy the authors and the organizers and the lecturers. It was very, very exciting. The other one was distribution of a UK publisher's custom novels, U-Star Books and Novels. We used that where there was the ability for you to become a character in a classic. So imagine casting yourself as Scrooge in A Christmas Carol. There's an online form you fill out, it automatically fills it out, and you can create custom gift editions of classic books, making you the star of these different adventures, which was really, really exciting. We did a double espresso book launch with Spotted Cow Press in Edmonton, a very small publisher, Squire Davis and the Crazy River. The author was live at a book festival in Alberta. The book was set in the Hamilton area, so there was an audience for it locally at Title's bookstore. We used a live webcam feed between the two bookstores so she could talk to the audience here and they could actually ask questions and interact. It was a dual book launch with interaction. We were printing the books at both of the stores. She ended up signing book plates, and we were able to ship them back to the store so they could watch her sign the book and a few days later have the actual book plate put into the book. It was a beautiful, beautiful day in book selling history. 2D codes using QR codes. Yubamark Books, they took a classic book. They were a publisher that had links to an online audio feed, so you could be listening to Around the World in 80 Days, but if you could read the textbook or scan the QR code to get the audio file, which linked to LibriVox.org, which is the free audio version of the book. An incredible way to enjoy the book 2 different ways. I'm going to talk a little bit about Campus Chills. This was a project that we had done, McMaster University Bookstore, the bookstore, Alberta University Bookstore in Edmonton, and Waterloo. We had 3 espresso book machines. We wanted to drive foot traffic into our store. Me being an editor, I thought, well, great, we don't need to pay an editor. I can do this book. Why don't we create an anthology of scary stories set on campuses and made available only in the 3 bookstores at Waterloo, at McMaster, and at University of Alberta. I solicited stories from 13 Canadian writers, including Kelly Armstrong, who's probably one of the better-known authors, to create stories set on their campuses, the campuses that they went to school in, which was a lot of fun for them. We also put special notes about the origin of the stories, and we made the books available. We actually had 13 contributors. We ended up participating with 2 bookstores, Algonquin bookstore in Ottawa and bookstore Dalhousie in Nova Scotia, so we can actually have 3 of the authors attend there that couldn't make it to the other bookstores. So basically, within a 24-hour period, we had all 13 authors in 5 different bookstore locations working on Campus Chills. It was an amazing event where people could see the books getting printed in the stores. We did some spooky events, like in Waterloo, the class was in a particular, there's a place that Julie Trineda had written about, a math class that was allegedly haunted, and that's where they did the launch. We did the launch right in the bookstore at McMaster, and it was a really exciting event for keeping people engaged. One of the things we did that for was to try and get foot traffic into our store and to demonstrate what we could do as bookstores just to try and embrace this publishing venture. The reality that we kept in the back of our minds was, if we can pull this off, could you just imagine what a publisher could do with the resources that they had available to them if they were to do similar projects like that? One of the things we were trying was to get people to come into our stores and buy it from us. But we found after just a couple of weeks that the demand was so high that people wanted to get it that I actually found the file of the book on BitTorrent, which was kind of strange because it was limited availability. So somebody worked really, really hard to buy a copy from one of our stores, scan that, and make it available as a PDF online. The first thing I did was I recognized people wanted it so badly they were willing to steal it. So much easier to buy it. So what we did is we used Lightning Source where we made the book available, and the book is still available today. So again, it was a $20 paperback. Cost was $4.99 per unit. We sold it to bookstores and the authors for $10, and it's still selling in 2013, still making money for the authors, still making money for the bookstores, and I'm still making it available in various areas. It's also available as an ebook. I like to think that you can do things that are book-like, and so some of the things that we ended up doing was custom books and calendars specifically for campuses with different special events. You talk about conferences coming in, novelty jokes, blank books, you know, the best of Stephen Harper, of course, with jokes in it. You can always take a crack at your favorite politician. We're not going to make any Rob Ford jokes here today. Some local radio personalities again, and then even taking public domain books like Shakespeare's The Sonnets and doing Thou Art More Lovely. Here are some of the strategies that worked really, really well. The EBM was great, but if you needed 500 books, that would be 5 8-hour shifts. So it was critical for us to partner with local printers, i.e. local publishers. That would allow us to do titles on demand. So we could do hardcover, we could do color, we could do larger print runs, so we could have 1,000 books if we needed it. That partnership with local printers and publishers allowed us to bring in over $125,000 in revenue in a single month in September 2011. There's no way we could have done it with a single EBM. So while the EBM allowed us to think that way and bring us there, we would not have been able to keep up with the requirement for 3,000 units, 3 different first-year textbooks, 5 upper-year textbooks that were in high demand. Partnerships that worked really, really well were local bookstores. Jane Christmas was living in Hamilton at the time. People were walking into Brian Prince Bookseller, who was in a way a competitor bookstore just down the street from McMaster, but we were able to work together so they could walk into Brian's store, order Jane's book, and we would split the margin on it. So we both got a sale out of that rather than Brian having to turn them down and us being frustrated that they weren't walking into our store. Partnering for global distribution with Lightning Source was an amazing thing to do. We created titles on demand, now selling books on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Chapters, Indigo, bookstores around the world, and also pushing them back into the EBM ExpressNet so that they were sitting at stores around the world, over 50 locations at the time that were able to, you could walk into that store and print that book there. We also available through Amazon's CreateSpace, which is a free service so that you can go in, make it available. It's not as broad, it's not as great a distribution as Lightning Source, so I still prefer Lightning Source for that, but it is something that a lot of independent authors are using. And similarly, independent bookstores are not going to order through Amazon. So CreateSpace is a great way to get it onto Amazon, not a great way to get it onto other places, but it is a place you can experiment with, and I encourage you to check out because they do have global distribution. OnDemandBooks.com runs the Espresso Book Machine. That's their website. They actually have links and lists to all the places where their machines are available. These are some of the locations that are available for the Espresso Book Machine, so beginning to grow, which is really, really exciting. They have the EBM Publisher Program, so you can see it's not just smaller publishers, it's not just academics, but there are trade publishers involved in making their books available through the Publisher Program. I also wanted to look at print on demand is a great small publisher solution. There are some publishers that basically use print on demand exclusively. 5 Rivers Publishing is an example of a micro publisher that basically has a team of professionals not located in a single office, but they have editors, they have an art director, and they're located in various locations across Canada. They're able to behave just like a traditional publisher in all the great ways that publishers work. but they're able to do it without having to worry about a warehouse. And they're able to have global marketplace distribution using print on demand. And there's great transparency into why they did that. And I put the link there, and there's why we published. This is why they published particular authors. So it also demonstrates they're transparently not just the publisher, but as what they selected to publish. And there's some great titles that they've done. The Espresso Book Machine is also expanding into new markets. So they're not just available through bookstores, but there was just last week they were announced that Bartell Drugs are starting to bring print on demand into the Seattle store, which again just creates additional markets to make these works available. And that's when you think more about those non-traditional works that maybe help support your other publishing projects. That's a great opportunity there. So some of the highlights I just want to cover is it's a similar process for digital to preparing books. It's pretty much the exact same print files, and it's a process that we're already familiar with as publishers. Increased speed to market is critical. Reimagine supply chain process. Again, we're reducing warehousing and shipping costs. It's adaptable. You can modify the cover. You can make changes. So you win an award or something prestigious happens, you can immediately change the cover and you're not sitting on a giant warehouse full of inventory. You can change the interior without worrying about the existing stock. And there's flexible supply chain options. POD is great for short print runs where required, and then offset printing can be used for larger cases as they come up, and that just frees up your cash flow. Again, it's great backlist options, dramatically reducing your warehouse and delivery costs, that just-in-time delivery via Lightning Source, instant in-store access via the Espresso Book Machine. I think it's still just the beginning, as we've just seen. It's not just bookstores. There's going to be more and more locations where that's available. And you can keep a book in print on demand to meet the long tail needs, which is continuing to grow. I wanted to say, consider what an indie author in a bookstore was able to do with minimal support. Think about what you as a professional publisher with the right tools and the right people can do. So prior to having any full-time staff, the printing and publishing taking place at MAC was just one of 3 areas responsible for me. Again, I want to stress, imagine how much better shows could have been had a publisher taken on a project like that. So this is very biased an opinion from an author and a bookseller, but I wanted to share my frontline experience. It's the way consumers and customers reacted, and I still want you to think about what you could do taking advantage of this technology. A brief look at North American global export stats, and again, these are from the U.S., but very similar markets, is that in July 2013, the Association of American Publishers reported through publishingtechnology.com 7.2% increase in revenue from sales in non-U.S. markets for 2012. The net revenue from non-U.S. markets reported at 833 million, 526 million units. And they were growing in areas like Asia, where English adult and young adult fiction and English language learning was popular and continuing to grow. Take a look at the publishers.org website there, where you can see more details about that. I think we're limited merely by only by our imagination. People in publishing are among the most creative, passionate, determined, and intelligent that I have ever had the privilege of working with. I can only imagine the new heights that they might achieve. Wanted to link some resources here that I think are very, very valuable for you. So Lightning Source and on-demand books, books on demand, pressbooks.com, Montreal, Hugh McGuire has an amazing tool for publishers where you can create print-ready PDFs and ebook files using the same single interface. There's another really intriguing book put together by Jerome Martin, including myself and some various other people in the industry, a free PDF book called Alternative Futures for What We Currently Know as Publishing. And again, we explore these opportunities. It's a free book published by the Association of Publishers of Alberta, and it's worth looking at. As well, Living at the Tip, Beyond the Digital Tipping Point of the Book World, is a collection ebook of essays about the ebook world that is available on Amazon. And now I'm going to pass it over to Rob, who's going to talk about some specific details for Lightning Source.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate your presentation and nice things you said about Lightning Source. I was asked to just give a brief overview, and this will be very brief, about Lightning Source. I came at this job that I'm currently in as a publisher. Lightning Source, just for your background, because Ingram's not especially well known in the Canadian market, was a division of Lightning Source, a spin-off, experimental kind of thing that was founded in 1997. I personally was one of the first 25 customers of Lightning Source. At that point, I was a Canadian publisher, a startup publisher in British Columbia, and basically what happened is the company, which was known in the distribution world as a sort of traditional wholesaler, realized that the number of titles being published was increasing every year, but the number of sales for each of those titles was decreasing, and eventually we'd find ourselves in a position where we wouldn't be able to stock in a warehouse all the titles that were being published, and we needed to come up with a solution for that. The solution was to essentially manufacture the books, not in the bookstore as in the Espresso model, but right in the warehouse and ship them out from there. Since 1997, the company has grown exponentially. We're now printing about 1.9 million books per month. The average print run is about 1.8 copies, and we're working with about 26,000 publishers, and we have 11 million titles in our digital catalog. So essentially the heart of the system is a database that from which we can manufacture a book within hours in various locations. And currently, and I understand this was some of the questions that have been submitted in advance of this webinar, where are these locations and how are they related to each other? So just very briefly, our global operations at this point are in Laverne, Tennessee. We have a new high-tech plant in Fairfield, Ohio. We have a plant in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is essentially devoted to fulfilling the demand of large northeastern suppliers. We have a new plant, which is sort of the pinnacle of everything we've done so far, which is slated to open in January in Fresno, California, and it will allow us to target, when it's opened, basically we'll be able to take an order and turn it around in 24 hours, delivered to 80% of the U.S. population. So for U.S. exports, this is a really important thing. It will essentially allow publishers to operate on Amazon time and compete with large online retailers by giving them access to the same kind of service levels. In addition to the U.S. facilities, we have a facility in Milton Keynes, UK. It does all our trim formats and sizes, just north of London. We have a facility which is in France, just outside of Paris, which is currently for the exclusive use of Hachette, but will be open to other publishers, which I think has huge implications for the Canadian market, particularly in Quebec later on. We have a facility in Melbourne, Australia, which is a fully owned Lightning Source facility, and then we have partnerships in Brazil, Germany, and most recently we've announced a partnership in Russia. So essentially, if you came down to the facility, it looks something like this. This is our Laverne facility. You have row upon row of printers manufacturing books 1 to 50, then it'll be down to 2, and another one will come off, and from all different publishers across that wide breadth of publishing clients. The map essentially looks like this. The blue dots are where we have traditional wholesale distribution facilities. The yellow dots are where we have actual POD facilities where we can manufacture the books in facilities that we own. The purple dots are places where we've struck arrangements with existing printers and distributors because for various reasons, often because it would be very difficult for a large U.S. company to do business in that territory. And then the green dots are what we call our global ship program. We discovered very early on that you could actually manufacture a book one at a time. It was the shipping that was really problematic into some of these territories. And so what we do is we consolidate the print-on-demand orders across those 26,000 publishers and put them all in the same plane and fly them in to these areas and then distribute, break up the consolidated shipment and distribute them from there. And that essentially allows us to ship books that are manufactured one at a time into places like South Africa for about $1, a book, which is ridiculously inexpensive if you've ever tried to ship something across the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean. Mark went over the key advantages, so I'm not going to dwell on that. But I think what's important for you to know as publishers in Canada is that the rest of the world has been moving very quickly on this, and I think we're a little bit behind in the Canadian market. Print on demand started with black and white content. In the last 2 years, we've introduced inkjet color printing, which has revolutionized the market. We can now manufacture color books for a fraction of a penny more than we per page than we do have traditionally done for black and white printing. All of our colors are 4-color. We're doing binding and perfect trade paperback, case bound, which is like a library bound jacket, even cloth. We've introduced matte finishes, even matte paper most recently. And that's also allowed us to venture into other areas that are not traditional, book publishing areas, but they're related to book publishing, such as journals and catalogs. And catalogs, especially, as more and more of this stuff goes online, the print runs are coming down, and it's becoming extremely economical for us to print catalogs in quantities of less than 500. So that if you have a trade show or you need to run an up-to-date catalog, we're able to manufacture those literally one at a time. If you need 50 to go to a conference, we can do that, and you can update it using an online interface of some sort. As far as definitions go, we have traditional offset printing, and I think this is really important for us to talk about. Traditional offset printing means you send it, you print 3,000 or less, maybe or more, I should say. And offset printing right now, I think, is around 1,500 copies. That still makes sense. Below that, we start to talk about short-run digital printing, usually 10 to 1,000 units. What we're doing at Lightning Source and what we have done and what the company was built on was true one-off printing. So we price to a unit of one, and we apply volume discounts. So you may print a book for $4, but if you print 100, then the price goes down, and if you print 1,000, you start getting a discount that's very much brings you into line with offset printing. Most recently, we've actually introduced a program called LifePrint, where we actually have automated. We batch all of that business that we do internationally and across those 26,000 publishers, and we've negotiated offset printing rates that no small publisher could ever access on their own, and that's built right into our web interface. If you don't remember anything else from this call, remember that Lightning Source and it works in two models. One is that what we call Publisher Direct, which is essentially what Mark has been talking about with the espresso machine, where you print a book as it's needed, when it's needed, very quickly. And ideally, you print that in a market that it's being sold in rather than having to ship the book long distances. And that's great, and I think that was the first major revolution of print on demand. But what's even better for most publishers is what we call wholesale distribution, where the entire distribution chain is turned on its head. In this model, essentially the publisher provides PDF files to us, print-ready files, and all the commercial information that we need to manufacture that book. We take that file and that metadata, we push it out to our channels internationally, which goes out to 195 countries and about 38,000 bookstores/libraries. We sell the books, and then we print the books, and then we collect the money for the books, and then we report back to the publisher on a monthly basis. And what this does is essentially creates a whole new kind of income stream for publishers. There's very little risk in exploring new markets. We can do a paperback edition and a virtual hardcover, and if someone buys it, that's great. It's found money. And if they don't, you're not really out anything except for your time in setting it up. As far as people often ask, give me a ballpark figure of what this technology costs. This is just an example. You might want to take a screenshot of this just for your own reference points. But for Lightning Source, if you walk off the street and say, I want to set up a book, 6x9 black and white trade paperback with a 4-color cover, it's 250 pages. This is the bread and butter of our business right now. You set the price as the publisher. You set a wholesale discount. We don't really get into telling you what the discount should be, but we can make some recommendations there. The cost of printing that book one at a time would be $4.15. And in the wholesale model, we essentially just subtract off the wholesale discount that you provide, and then end up with a net selling price. In this case, it would be $11.23. And then we remit to you the difference between this actual selling price of the book and the print cost. So in this particular example, a $24.95 book with 250 pages would net the publisher $7.08 for each unit that's sold. And it's important to note in that model that there's no shipping or handling cost to the publisher. That's all part of the back end that the printer/distributor handles on behalf of the publisher. And for export markets, this is huge because it relieves you of the responsibility of having to cross borders physically and allows you to start selling your content internationally into areas which you may not have ever thought, probably weren't economically feasible for you to access. A place like Russia, for example, we're very excited about because there's about 3,000 bookstores and people read a lot of English language content, particularly in the academic market. If you tried to access that, the traditional way of shipping, you'd lose your shirt fairly quickly. Print on demand lets you put it up and see what happens. If that seems extremely complicated to you, we have a website that does this all automatically. You just punch in the numbers and play with them until you figure out, until you're happy with the results, that you're making enough per transaction. I'm not going to say any more because we want to have some time for questions, but this is the traditional supply chain. The POD supply chain is much, much simpler, and I think that's a good thing for the publishers because most of us got into this because we want to create content and sell it, not because we want to be chasing books around the world and collecting money. And I think this helpfully illustrates the difference between a very complicated situation where there's lots of handoffs, everybody's taken a piece of it, and there's a lot of paperwork involved, to a system like, that's simplified and essentially limits the number of places where there's necessary handoff. One final point I'll leave you with, and this is just based on our own projections as a company. Right now, we believe that print on demand already comprises 5% of the market. We expect over the next 5 years that will grow to be 35% of the market share. And I'm a Canadian myself, and I like to watch hockey, and I always tell all my American clients as well as the Canadian ones that it's always good to follow Wayne Gretzky's advice: skate to where the puck's going, not to where it is. So these are important things, I think, that we need to think about as Canadian publishers, and thank you for your time and letting me talk to you about them.